If you would take out your message outline for today, we are studying grace. About 100 years ago in Eastern Europe, times were really bad, and there was a small minstrel troupe of 10 or 12 people, singers and dancers, that were making their way, not from country to country or city to city or town to town, but more like from hamlet to hamlet. And they were barely surviving because there weren't crowds coming to see them. Mostly small groups of people that would come for their evening performance, and they were making just enough money to get by. But then, because there was a recession going on in Eastern Europe, people were less and less inclined to spend money on entertainment, and they began to wonder if they were going to be able to even make it with what they were doing. They were quite discouraged, and it really hit sort of a crucial moment one night when about 4 o'clock it began to snow. And some of them began to think, well, who's going to come out in this blizzard like this to see us? And so some of them were saying, maybe we should just cancel the show tonight and just take a night off. And they were about to do that when the oldest man in the group said, I don't think we should do that. He said, I don't think we should punish those who would come because of those who didn't come. And I think, secondly, that the show should go on, and we should do the very best that we can, no matter how many or few are in our audience tonight. And the group thought about it, and there was something in them that sort of rallied to that idea, that there was something here to grasp onto, and so they did. So they went ahead and they did their show as normal, and it was a very sparse group of people that night. And they went back after the show to get out of their costumes and take their makeup off. And the oldest man in the troupe came back, and he was holding in his hand a piece of paper. And he called everybody over, and they could tell there was something exciting in his tone and in his countenance that he wanted to share with them. And he said, I just received this note from one of the people that was here in the audience tonight. He said, this is what it says: thank you for a brilliant performance. And then it was signed simply, your king. Your king. Now, when I thought about this particular story, I think about this is sort of a metaphor for life. At least it seems like a metaphor for my life. And that there's a paradox in this story. What on one hand seemed like such a small, insignificant thing to most of the people in the group, it wasn't until after the performance and they looked back and realized who was there that it wasn't a small thing at all, that it really mattered. Something important mattered during that evening. When I think about grace, we usually think about grace when it comes to salvation, which of course it does. But it's easy to sort of just to not think about grace now that we're a Christian, and yet there are 5 paradoxes where God uses these things we would never imagine, to introduce us to grace. But these 5 the grace doesn't come through the front door. It comes through the back door, and it comes through in the most unwanted ways. I'd like to look at these 5 paradoxes today from our passage. Number 1, we discover God's real purposes through the difficulties of life. We discover God's real, and I have that in quotation marks, purposes through the difficulties of life. And the reason I say real is because as a Christian, you read your Bible, you come to church for a while, you realize that God has a purpose for all of us in life. He is accomplishing his grand story, the great story of life through us. And we know that theologically. We have that in our head. But it's not until difficulties come storming in the back door of our life that suddenly the realization of God's purposes move from our head down into our heart. We don't just know about them now. We own them. We grasp them. And there's something in us that wants to get on board with what God is doing that we would never have understood through a life that's going on just great. One of the things I appreciate about the scripture is that it gives us the most real picture of life that you can imagine. There is nothing Pollyannish about the scripture or sugarcoating life. And our passages for today illustrate this. 2 Corinthians 4, 7 through 10 is our first passage. Paul says we have this treasure in earthen vessels. And he's talking about the earthen vessels are you and me, but there's a treasure. And the treasure is not the box itself, but it's what's inside the box is the treasure. In this case, Skittles. We have this treasure, red, white, and blue Skittles. July 4th Skittles. We have this treasure in earthen vessels to show that the transcendent power of God belongs to God and not to us. And then he gives 4 examples of how we discover God's power. And these are all backdoor things. These are things none of us want. We are afflicted in every way is the first one. We are afflicted in every way, but not crushed. Perplexed, but not given to despair. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested. Now let's go back to verse 8. And he mentions these 4 things. The first thing he says we have is we are afflicted in every way. And this verse is talking not about outward affliction, but inward affliction. The affliction that happens between this ear and this ear. And the idea is that we are pressed or pressured or afflicted is a really great translation of this word. Stressed is the idea. And then he says we are afflicted in every way, meaning there are lots of ways that we feel stress and pressure. And this is, again, an inward thing, he says. The second one he says is that we are perplexed. And the Greek word there means confused. It means, I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to evaluate what's going on. I can't see clearly, is the idea. I don't understand what's going on. There are often times in life where life seems like that. He says, but not driven to despair. The third one he said is persecuted. And this time, he's not talking about an inward difficulty, but an outward. That there are people in his life, and maybe people in your life, where maybe you are ridiculed for your faith, or ridiculed because you believe in the Bible, or ridiculed because of some belief that goes against sort of the current culture of what other people think we ought to do. You really see this in social media. More and more as I watch social media, there are a lot of us that just sort of have withdrawn from this, because no matter what you try to say in the best possible wording, it's very easy for those things to get twisted into something that it's not. You see this in the news every day. Everybody loves to twist the words of somebody else, and this happens for us. And then the fourth one he mentions is struck down, but not destroyed. And here, this is another outward thing, where this may actually be something that happens to us physically. It certainly happened to Paul. Now, these are 4 difficulties. And it strikes me that whenever I go through some type of difficulty, my first reaction is to pray, and generally the prayer is, God, would you fix this? And that's not a bad prayer. It's a good prayer. But in all 4 of these things, what Paul mentions is he doesn't fix any of these 4 things, at least not in this case. Well, why not? In fact, the answers to that prayer, Lord, would you fix this, are rather seem to us mediocre. We are afflicted in every way, and what's the response? But we're not crushed. That's the answer. We're not crushed. Number 2, perplexed, confused. I don't know what to do. I don't understand what's going on. The question, why? Now, what is the answer from heaven here? Not driven to despair. That's the answer. Apparently. Sometimes God can fix these things, and other times this is the answer he leaves us with. Persecuted, but not forsaken. Sometimes this persecution happens within your own family, sometimes with your kids, sometimes with parents, sometimes with extended family members. Sometimes this happens at work. Sometimes it happens in a neighborhood. But not forsaken. Struck down, but not destroyed. All of these seem sort of like underwhelming responses to these things. And yet, there are two reasons that Paul says at the first of these four things and at the end of these four things why this is true. That God has two purposes in mind for both these things. Robert, let's go back to verse 7. We have this treasure in earthen vessels inside of us to show that the transcendent power belongs to God and not to us. Now, why are these four things going on, and why is there not a fix? One reason is because God is wanting to show the world and the people in your life that there is something that keeps you together even when you just want to throw in the towel. And this can be throwing in the towel on your marriage or on your personal life, on integrity. It can be thrown in the towel with your kids or your parents, or thrown in the towel health-wise, or a whole lot worse in this culture. There's something, this treasure of Christ that lives within inside of us that keeps us going, even when life is difficult. And the second thing, the life of Christ is made known in us and through us, and that's verse 10. Let's go to verse 10. Always carrying in the body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested in our bodies. Now, he sort of makes a strange illustration here. It's kind of hard to understand. He takes us back to the crucifixion. He says, remember when Jesus died? Remember that. And remember when they laid him in the tomb? Remember that. And remember on what we call Easter Sunday, rose from the dead. Out of death came life. And Paul says, here he uses this illustration to drive home why these other four things, afflicted and perplexed and persecuted and struck down, are important. Because what they illustrate is that the life of Christ is in you and me. The life of Christ in his people. Even when it seems like what you're looking at metaphorically is an empty tomb or someone hanging on a cross. For example, we talked about surrender. And I think Lance mentioned that today. A surrender. The principle is the same. Lord, help me to surrender myself today. And what happens is, somehow through that act of surrender, there's something that happens of Christ being formed in me that I could not do. Out of seeming death to self, the life of Christ is more and more formed in me. Or, Lord, I surrender my needs, whatever the needs happen to be, singular or plural, at any given moment. Lord, I surrender this to you. I really wish this would happen, but I don't think it is. I surrender that to you, and God says, I'll meet that need maybe a different way. Out of death, burying those needs in the soil, out of that springs life. Lord, I give you my desires. The things that I find when I'm demanding something from people, I give those to you. And out of those, God says, I'm going to meet you and bring life out of those things. The life of Christ is discovered, felt, realized through difficulties. Now, for about 6 months or so, I have this illustration that I use. This is a very personal illustration to me. I mean, I use this every day for about 6 months. Is no matter what I am facing in life, no matter how discouraged I may get or are afflicted and persecuted, all those things we looked at, no matter how things look to me, I always carry with me the life of Christ. And I picture that as a backpack. And I can put my backpack on. Now, for example, when I go home after work, at this point in our life, I have a wife, Mindy, and my mother-in-law living with us. And, living with one woman, is challenging, as every husband knows. I'm not going to say anything. I'll just let you infer whatever conclusions you want to draw. When I walk up to the front door on any given day, I have no idea what I'm going to face behind that door. And there are many times where it feels overwhelming. I just don't know what to do. It's that second word, perplexed. I wish I had a magic wand. I wish I had a script I could read. And I don't have a magic wand or a script. But when I walk in the front door, I think you have something far better than a magic wand and a script. You have a backpack. You have the life of Christ in you. Go find these two ladies. Plop yourself down and ask them about their day, trusting that the life of Christ will somehow, out of what seems like death to me from my perplexity, will bring life. When I get up to speak every Sunday, you would think that I would feel a lot better about this after 33 years. And every Sunday it's the same thing. About 9 o'clock, I'm thinking, what in the world am I doing? Can I call Mark or Lance and maybe they can do this instead? I'm sitting here thinking, oh, Lord, please help me. I know what I want to say. I just don't seem capable enough to say it. Can you take these words like arrows and pierce the hearts of people? And sometimes it just seems like I just don't know what to do. And yet, I have the life of Christ with me, my backpack. And I stand up, no matter how weak I may feel or perplexed I may feel or inadequate I may feel, none of those things matter. What matters is I have the life of Christ with me, and I'm going to do the best that I can, trusting that life of Christ within me. Sometimes I talk to people who have extremely difficult and complex problems that they're dealing with. And I had one of those situations this week where an older gentleman came in to talk, and he has some very, very difficult problems, some with some of his adult children, with one particular adult child secondarily, and as a second one. Third one, his own financial issues. Fourth, financial issues for when this old man passes away and what's going to happen. And sort of the family drama that's going in among all of this, it's just a mess. A mess. It's like a ball of yarn all gnarled up. And he comes in and says, can you help me? What do I do about this? Where's my backpack? I'm looking for that backpack. And yet, I get my backpack on, start listening and asking questions, and the life of Christ shows up to help me and to help him. We discover God's real purposes for us through the difficulties of life. That's paradox number one. Paradox number two on the inside of your handout. We discover God's power through unanswered prayer. You say, wait a minute, I thought we discovered God's power through answered prayer. Well, we do that. We do discover God's power through answered prayer. That certainly is true. But here, Paul gives us an example of how he discovered a greater power through unanswered prayer. 2 Corinthians 12:7. To keep me from being too elated, and the idea is proud, by the abundance of revelations, meaning he had a vision of what heaven is going to be like. And it was overwhelming to him. And he found within himself this desire to sort of strut what he now knew about heaven and be as proud as a peacock. And God said, I can take care of that problem. You never have to really pray for humility. God's already ahead of us on that. From being too elated, a thorn was given me in the flesh. Now, we don't know what that was, but there was some type of physical affliction that he carried around with him. Number two, a messenger of Satan. So in addition to the physical anomaly, whatever that was, he had that annoying voice of Satan, the accuser of the brothers, that gets in there and tempts us and twists words and just makes messes and loves to make drama. Thorn in the flesh, messenger of Satan. And the third thing he says, why? For the purpose of harassing him. Harassing him. So what do? You do what Paul did. You pray. God, can you take away this thorn in the flesh? Can you deal with this messenger of Satan? I'm tired of being harassed. Can you deal with that? He prays, and he prays once, and nothing happens. He prays again, the thorn in the flesh. Take that. Messenger of Satan, I died of that. Take it. Being harassed. Second time, No answer to that prayer. Third time, the same thing. Finally, he gets an answer, but it's not the answer he wanted. It was an answer. Verse 8, he says, 3 times I besought the Lord about that it should leave me. And verse 9, but he said to me, and here's the answer. This is all we know of the answer. God may have said more to him. But what's important in this answer, he records. My grace is sufficient for you. Not exactly what I was praying for. Not what I was hoping for. I was hoping you might do something about this thorn. I was hoping you might do something about this messenger of Satan or about being harassed. My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Here's an example where God didn't answer the prayer that Paul prayed the way he wanted that answered. In fact, what you might think, well, I don't know if you think this, but I think, I've got some prayers that I've prayed that seem to go unanswered the way I wish they had been answered. But he says, but there's something else here. My power is made perfect in weakness. Now, what happens here? Well, apparently the thorn in the flesh kept going. It wasn't eradicated. And the messenger of Satan was allowed to stay there. And the feeling of being harassed continued. Now, when I think about this, I think about that, God does this with all of us at different times. But one of the illustrations that came to my mind was years ago when my son was between the age of 5 and 16, he played baseball. And I was a Little League coach all the way from T-ball all the way up to senior majors, the 15 and 16-year-olds. And it was a great time. Loved coaching baseball. And you can teach kids how to catch a fly ball, catch a line drive. You can teach kids how to get down on ground balls, how to make a throw from the outfield, how to hit the cutoff man, how to make a throw across the diamond to first base or to home plate. You can teach a kid behind the plate how to catch, be a catcher. You can teach kids how to steal bases, get a lead off, all that stuff. And they love all that stuff. But the hardest thing for me to coach kids on was batting, on hitting. Now, every season when we'd start, all the 12 kids thought they were great hitters. And even though Mike Trout wasn't hitting back then, they all thought they were the next Mike Trout until we started having live pitching. And then suddenly things began to change. There was a sense of what we would call here weakness, of failure, that wasn't getting any better because they were trying harder. And after a while, there began to be a change in the attitudes, the mindset of the boys. They became coachable regarding hitting. And what used to be like, oh, coach, you don't want us to do that. Hitting off a tee with a stationary ball seemed stupid to them at first until they had trouble with hitting live pitching. And the idea, well, maybe coach is onto something by hitting the ball off a tee into the chain link fence. And then you have a little drill like soft toss. You just throw a ball up in the air and they have to hit it just there. And all of a sudden that makes sense to them. And you can start with a bigger ball and get smaller and smaller balls. And then finally comes the day when, hey, we're going to go to the batting cages, down at university, off university, batting cages. And at the first they're kind of, I'm going to go to the batting cages. Now they're all pretty excited about going to the batting cages. Why? Because they've seen this particular principle at work. In their weakness, or more specifically, in their admitted weakness. Not theoretical weakness, their admitted weakness. Things began to change. They began to discover a power to hit the ball. Verse 9, the last part of verse 9 says, I will all the more gladly boast of my weaknesses that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Now that is a very convicting sentence to me because I find that most of the time I begrudge my weaknesses. I don't like them. I wish they'd go away. I'm tired of dealing with my weaknesses. I wish there are a lot of things in my life when I was much younger I thought would have changed by now. And there are a number of things that have changed, but there's a whole number of things that it seems to me like haven't changed that much at all. And there's something in me that just begrudges that. So discouraged by that. Paul says, no. I gladly boast about this because I'm becoming a better hitter. I'm learning how to hit a fastball. I'm learning how to hit a slider. I'm learning how to hit a curveball or a changeup is the idea. This is the second. We discover God's power through unanswered prayer. God is up to something else. The third paradox. We discover God's power when we feel puny. We discover God's power when we feel puny. What strikes me here is, verse 10, for the sake of Christ, then, I am content with weaknesses, insults, hardships, persecutions, calamities. For when I am weak, then I am strong. He mentions 5 things of which he has to deal with: weaknesses, insults, hardship, persecution, calamities. He says, when I am weak, I am strong. That's the principle we just looked at in the last verse. But notice what he says, how he thinks about this. The first part of this verse. For the sake of Christ, not for the sake of how I'm feeling. Then I am content. Content. I hate feeling weak. I hate it when I'm insulted. I hate it when I go through hardships or calamities. Paul says, no. It's a place for contentment. To learn to be content in the midst of these difficulties. Content. The fourth paradox. An eternal perspective that enables me not to give up today. An eternal perspective enables me not to give up today. Proverbs 26:12. Do you see a man who's wise in his own eyes? There's more hope for a fool than for him. Just because I think I see things correctly doesn't mean I see things correctly. Just because I think I have an accurate view of things does not mean I have an accurate view of things. That's how a fool thinks. 1 Corinthians 13:12 says, now we see but a poor reflection as in a mirror. You know, what he's talking about here is there's sometimes in life where you're trying to see clearly about something, and you've just gotten out of the shower, and the mirror's all fogged. You can't see anything. Well, you can see there's a person in the mirror, the shape of a person. That's about all I can make. I think it's me through that. Paul says that's how it is sometimes looking at life's situations here. It's like the mirror's all foggy. I can see some things there, but I can't see clearly. He says, John 7:24, Jesus says, do not judge by appearances, but judge with right judgment. Now, all these things remind me of one thing. I dare not trust how things seem to me. The problem is, I naturally trust how I think things seem to me. And that's made messes in my life. And I've said some stupid things and done some stupid things because of that. And how it seems to me often leads me towards discouragement. And sometimes you're not going to quit, or in my case, you're not going to retire, but sometimes that seems quite tempting. Maybe I should think more about this. 2 Corinthians 4:16. Therefore, we do not lose heart. Not going to give up. Though outwardly we are wasting away, yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. So we fix our eyes, not on what is seen, but on what is unseen. For what is seen is temporary, what is unseen is eternal. Notice what he sees on the outside. He sees outwardly we are wasting away. Now, I think he may be talking in one way about getting old. I have my issues with becoming older than I used to be. But there are other ways that we waste away. And one of the ways that we waste away without Christ, you see often in the news. Perhaps you've heard of the Jeffrey Epstein situation, where a billionaire on top of the world had everything, what he thought, for years. And it finally caught up with him. And it looked like he was going to spend a lot of years in jail for sex crimes, and things don't go well in jail, in federal prison, for sex crime folks usually. News yesterday was he committed suicide in his jail. Now, that's a tragedy. But that man was wasting away for decades and did not know it. I'm not coming down on him. I'm just stating a fact. There are lots of ways we waste away. Personally, you may waste away as a husband, waste away as a wife, waste away as a parent. Inwardly, we are being renewed, and then notice what he says, day by day. Really? You mean something's going on in me every day? You know, I look at Saturday, and I look at me today, and I don't see that much difference between yesterday and today. And I go back to Friday, and I don't see that much difference between me on Friday and me today, and Thursday, and I can just keep on going. And yet the scriptures say something's going on. Something's going on inside of you. You are slowly being changed day by day. And then he contrasts that with, now think in terms of eternity. What's it going to be like then? Our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. An eternal perspective enables me not to give up today. And the fifth paradox. Persecution of me allows others to see the power of Christ in us. The scripture says that all Christians are going to be persecuted. And sometimes this can be in really rough forms. If you're a Christian over in the Middle East, this may mean that you're beheaded, or that your family is killed, or your eyes are gouged out, or you're burned alive, or your church is burned up with you inside it. This also happens over in South Asia. Most of the persecution we face here in America as Christians is more of a personal nature of being scorned or mocked because we believe the Bible. Or the most twisted kind of persecution, I think, is when the other side makes a straw man argument as if that's what we think, and then mocks the straw man. Well, you believe in the Bible, and I believe in science. What a ridiculous thing to say about me. You believe in faith, and I believe in facts and evidence. That's a straw man argument. What a ridiculous thing to say about me. Or taking your best intentions and how you're trying to be an encouragement to people and having it twisted into you're manipulative. That's the kind of persecution that we generally deal with here in our country about this. Now, what he says is persecuted but not forsaken, meaning Christ is with us when people think weird things or scornful things or badly misjudge us, but not destroyed, always carrying in the body the life of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be manifested, meaning made known. Opportunity. When somebody says something like you is so ridiculous, instead of responding negatively to them, engage politely in conversation. In this culture, that's becoming more and more rare. What enables me to do that? This backpack, the life of Christ. that's within me. These are 5 paradoxes of grace meant for us as Christians. We really don't like the way they come to our door. We want them to come the way we want, through that front door, and they all come through that back door. Years ago, there was a coach in a small college, a football coach, and there was a guy that walked onto the team. And he wanted to make the team, and Coach Lou realized that this guy was just not a good football player. And within a couple days realized that he was probably going to have to tell him, "I'm sorry, but you can't make the team." But as he watched this kid practicing, he was struck by how infectious an attitude this kid had. And all the coaches and all the other athletes on the team began to love this kid. And so the coach said, well, maybe I'll keep him on the team, if for no other reason to help inspire the other players through the course of the season. And so he came in to ask the coach if I made the team. And Coach Lou says, well, I want to tell you 2 things. You've made the team. But number 2, I'm going to make no promises to you about any playing time. The kid said, that's fine. I just want to be on the team. Great. So the season went on, and week after week, the kid never played it down. Not close to playing it down. And yet, one of the things that happened was that apparently some of the times his father would come to visit, and the 2 of them could be seen walking around the campus arm in arm. And it was such a touching thing. And the athletes on the team knew this, and they were sort of struck by this and kind of a sense of wonder, and it's particularly hit the coach. He was just marveled at what kind of relationship does this father have with his son, that when he comes to visit, this is what they do. And near the end of the season, the coach was in his office, and he got a call from the administration, and the administration had the call and said, Coach, we have some bad news. That particular kid, his father just died. And we think because of the relationship you have him, you should tell him. And the coach said, okay, I will. So next practice, when practice was done, he called the kid in, and they sat down in the coach's office, and he gave him the bad news. The kid welled up with tears, and the grief began. And the coach was trying to figure out what to say, and he said, son, is there anything I can do to help you with this? He said, I'll do anything that I can to help you with this. And after a few moments, the kid said, would you start me in this Saturday's game? The coach inwardly kind of went, oh, well, I'll do almost anything. He said, sure, kid. And he realized he'd play him 3 plays and then probably pull him. So the game came on Saturday. The kid played linebacker. He was starting on the defense. And on the very first play of the game, they called the blitz. The kid made it into the backfield and sacked the quarterback. And everyone's like, did you just see what happened? This guy got a sack. And the second play, he did good. Third play, the second series they went out there, he was starting again. This kid played the whole game, playing clearly over his head. The coach was dumbfounded. The players were dumbfounded. A lot of the student body knew what had happened with his dad, and they were just it's kind of like the new Rockney movie, or what's Rocky or whatever, Rudy. It's kind of like that story, And so after the game, they got back to the locker room, and all the players nominated him for player of the game, and the coach gave him a game ball. And after everybody left, the coach sat down with him and said, I've never seen you in practice play anything like that today. He said, did you do this because as sort of a tribute to your father? And he said, no. He said, well, what happened? He said, well, my dad and I had a secret that nobody knew around here, that we kept very tight to ourselves. My dad was blind. And today was the first day he got me to ever see me play football. That story is also a paradox. And it's a paradox filled with wonder. And it's filled with wonder because it's layered over some awful difficulties in life. Let's pray together. I mentioned a few moments ago that Jesus died on a cross. He did that for all of us. And he did it for a reason, because none of us could save ourselves from our sin. None of us has that ability to completely obey as we're meant to be. And we have disobeyed God, your commandments, in countless ways. And yet he loves each person who's listening to this. He loves you. And even if you have been one who has ignored him or given him lip service or maybe even scorned him, that love has not changed. And he still invites you to become one of his children. That sin may be forgiven, that our hearts may be washed clean, made new, that we would discover the wonder of grace that sees us at our very worst and still wants us. And all that's required is just to humbly say, Lord, I am a sinner. I have fallen short. I've missed the mark. I have disobeyed. I've been a rebel. Thank you for taking all of that on yourself, on your shoulders on the cross. And may the resurrected life of Christ now come into my life to begin to make me new day by day, to become the person you desire me to be, and I'm designed to be, and I long to be. Father, probably like me, your children begrudge a lot of backdoor things that you do. And I pray that at least for today, we will turn around and look at those backdoor things that come our way and begin to learn, like Paul, to be content, even to boast in those backdoor things.